Good afternoon. Here's the double act for this session this afternoon. So we're going to talk about mobile. I'm delighted that Rich was saying it's such an amazing platform. Of course it is. But you have to make an awful lot of noise in all games. And I was recently, well, last week I was in Bulgaria, in Sofia, at a Games Developers Conference there. And to those who don't know, this is Dr. Mundo from League of Legends, and this is the extent that they went to present to their own games conference, OnFest. They had some guy in an old Soviet crane hanging for his life, painting this thing for literally months. And this is particularly relevant, I think, to the games industry. And for every Angry Birds, of course, there's 20,000 dead birds out there. So how do you actually get noticed in today's mobile market? Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I've acquired over my kind of lengthy period in games. I started, Rich had some old photos. He's Johnny-come-lately compared to where I came from. This is 1975. I started a company called Games Workshop. This is the real handsome guy on this side. And two other friends of mine, we started this company in our flat in Shepherd's Bush. And we reached out to everybody we knew in games. And one of the recipients of our newsletter was this is our newsletter. You can see this full-color glossy magazine here. We sent it out to everybody we knew in games. One of the recipients was Gary Gygax. He lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And Gary had invented this game with Dave Arneson called Dungeons & Dragons. Now, this is a game that doesn't really look particularly exciting, pretty ordinary artwork, yet it was theater of the mind. It opened up the imaginations of all the players. Here was a radical role-playing game in which you were a hero. You went on these incredible role-playing adventures. Somebody designed a dungeon, a games master, and you as wizards and heroes and clerics went on these fantastic journeys of the mind. And I think the important thing I'm trying to make here is that at the end of the day, a game, when people ask me what are the three most important things in a game, I always say it's gameplay, gameplay, gameplay. Technology and graphics play a huge supporting role, but at the end of the day, and especially in mobile, as Supercell and others have proven, the gameplay has to be the starting point. We went over to the States and we went to sign up other fledgling games companies back in 1976. In order, we got the Fritz Lieber, the science fiction author. Next to him is Gary Gygax. The next guy along there is Professor Bach, who invented Empire of the Petal Throne. Then myself holding the boxes. Rob Kuntz is one of the D&D designers. And Steve Jackson in the front, my business partner. The worrying thing about this slide is that the first three guys in line on the left are all dead. And I'm kind of next in line. So, but at least I'm still alive today. We also got to meet Miss Wisconsin in 1976. We came back and opened our very first Games Workshop. I'm still looking for somebody who's in that queue. If you're in there, either in the room or in line, give me a shout. Of course, Games Workshop has evolved over time, but the premise is still there. If you own a pilgrimage store to look at this store now, you'll find it's now the Bosnia-Herzegovina Community Advice Center. But time moves on, everything appears to change, but the more things change, the more they remain the same. And I think the games industry still is very much like it was way back in the 70s when I first started in it. The starting point has to be a good game. And I'd now like to introduce Paul Googe. And the reason why I'm introducing him in this way is that I chair his company, Playdemic, and have enormous respect that he's involved with games that first started in mobile, then he moved to Facebook, and now he's entering the smartphone market. Perhaps late, but with great knowledge and great experience. Now, when I told him about this talk we were going to give today, I said, as chairman of your company, how would you sell to me, you entering this market at this point in time? Possibly late, crowded market, 800 million apps. How do you get visibility? You know, games have moved completely from a box product to a digital service, from premium to freemium, from an analog to digital. How are you going to get your company known in a monumentally competitive space? And so he's going to say Paul is going to say how he convinced me that this was the right thing to do for his games. Paul, over to you, my son.
Super. Thank you. Thanks, Ian.
I'll be at the front, kind of giving you marks out of 10.
You could do the sign language. That as a United fan, I'm now used to coming second to a City fan, so thank you. So yeah, I mean, this is a little bit about my background. I'm going to be very brief on this. It doesn't go back quite as long as Ian's, as you can tell, hopefully. I joined the games industry in '99, having a career before that as an investment banker, which I try and keep quiet. But I got myself a proper job in the games industry in '99 with a business called Battlemail. Some people might remember it. It was a turn-based multiplayer game, playable via emails. It's game transport. But the reason I put it up here is that was my first exposure to mobile. So we built a mobile version of that game, actually in 2000, released it in 2001. This was pre-Java, Brew, all that kind of stuff. We actually wrote this to the metal of 17 million Siemens mobile phones. And it was a multiplayer game that used SMS as its game transport. And I think at the time, the first time anyone ever done that on a mobile phone. And it got a lot of critical acclaim, and it also got a lot of users. But what it showed us is that, for me as someone interested in the games industry as a mass market proposition, it opened us up to a huge number of people that we didn't consider as our marketplace. I sold that business to a company called Mformer, but it really sort of got bitten by the mobile bug and started another company called Rockpool Games. Rockpool Games was a mobile-only developer, and we built a whole load of games for various different companies. There's sort of Sega there, Worms, Sega Rally rather, Worms, MotoGP, Sonic. We did a whole bunch of stuff, all for Brew and Java and all that great marketplace that some of you will know well, what I call Mobile 1.0. And whilst that was a great company, and I was very fortunate to sell that company actually to IDOS, which is where Ian and I first started working together, I got pretty jaded by mobile then. Mobile, as those of you who were in the business then will remember, was a pretty fragmented marketplace, to say the least. We spent far too much money porting and certifying and QAing, and not enough money making great games. We were also at the mercy of telcos, who, again, those of you in the marketplace at the time will remember, weren't great marketeers. They weren't brilliant at selling content. They didn't really understand the games business. So it was a business that really didn't function very well. But it was one of those things that really captured our imagination as game makers, because, again, we thought this was an opportunity to get out to the mass market. So once I'd spent a bit of time running casual games for IDOS, I set up a business called Playdemic. And Playdemic I set up in 2009 to really jump on what I thought represented the next opportunity really in casual gaming, that being social gaming on Facebook. And Playdemic has done very well there. We've had some good successes. Games like Gourmet Ranch and Village Life have been million-plus DAU products, and we've made tens of millions of dollars in virtual goods. But like so many fads in the games industry, like so many things that we've chased, it seems that there is this sentiment now that, or rather a sentiment occurred a few years ago, that Facebook was no longer sexy and it was all about mobile. That's where all the users were. At the time, we stuck to our guns and carried on making games on Facebook. However, we became more and more interested in the possibility of going back to mobile. From our perspective, we were somewhat jaded for the reasons I already mentioned, but we felt mobile was something we needed to go back to. And as Ian mentioned, at this point, having been very early to mobile back in 2000, we were coming very late to the party. And as Ian said, a lot of people, very sensible people, said, "Why are you doing this now? This market is completely blown apart. You're not going to get you haven't got a hope of doing anything here." From my perspective, it was an opportunity to put these games that work so well for us on social platforms like Facebook onto a better platform, onto a platform that we feel that would be more suitable for those games. It also continued that idea of taking our games and what we're trying to do in our sort of general mission, and the guys that I employ back at the office, of trying to get these games out to as many people as possible, but still a big commercial challenge. So I want to talk a little bit about that commercial challenge, but also, and I hope you'll forgive me for this, I'm just going to jump through a couple of stats, because I think there's been a lot of things happening really the last 6 months around mobile. And I think as an industry, as I said earlier, we're very good at being faddy about what's sexy and what's not sexy, and what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. And looking at the long view, and a couple of the speakers there have talked about that, looking at the long view of where these marketplaces are going, I think we need to just remind ourselves a little bit about how powerful mobile is as an opportunity when it comes to hardware and software, and ultimately as a game playing device. So I'm going to skip through some of this quite quickly, and forgive me, but I think some of these numbers are quite important. So looking at the opportunity of mobile, hardware, software, demand, and money. My way of sizing the market, not a particularly academic way of doing it, just my view and how I sold this to the guys back at the company. So from a hardware perspective, we know smart devices are taking over the world. 1.5 billion devices, 1.5 billion smartphones already in circulation. or certainly by the end of this year. That is a huge, huge number of devices. It's a number which we throw around a lot, but just stopping to thinking about that and thinking about those as potential game playing devices, that is gargantuan. There's about 150 million PS3, Xbox 360s, I think, in the world today. That number is growing hugely. We'll get a forecast that number is going to be shipping somewhere in the region of 1.75 million a year by 2017. It's growing and continuing to grow. iPads, again, a beautiful game playing device already, or tablets rather, already 330 million of those devices out there and growing hugely. There's going to be 1 billion of those things shipped in 2017. A massive marketplace, a massive installed base of hardware that can play games. And the install bases are highly penetrated. The key marketplaces are already over 50%. Many of the key demographics in those marketplaces, that being 18 to 34, is over 80%. Everyone has got one of these things. So what about the software? So good having all that hardware there, but is the software opportunity still there? Is it still interesting to us? Is there still an opportunity? Well, a lot of you'll know these numbers. They're crazy numbers. 50 billion downloads from the App Store, now over 50 billion downloads from Google Play. Those of you who watch these numbers carefully will see that Google Play overtook iOS this year in terms of the number of downloads. And when you consider that Google Play had only hit 25 million app downloads by the end of last year, to get to 50, I think by Google I/O, they were just under 50, by Google I/O is a pretty impressive result. That's Google overtaking Apple. So that's all well and good. Huge amounts of hardware, huge demand for software, huge availability of software. But what about the demand for games? Well, again, you all know these stories. But when you think about it from a perspective of the industry, it's really important to think about that engagement level. 700 million sessions a day of Candy Crush being played. 130 million DAU estimated on mobile. 1 trillion candies crushed. 50 million downloads of Temple Run 2 inside of 2 weeks. 25 million downloads of Plants vs. Zombies just over 2 weeks. Somewhere in the region of 2 billion downloads of Angry Birds. These are mind-numbing numbers. They're numbers that we throw around all the time, but when you stop and think about what that means in terms of the population, when you think about the potential addressable marketplace we have, and think back to Victor's conversations this morning around growing our marketplace, there's an article today on Games Industry that says we should forget about mobile. You never make any money there, forget about it. There's no point. Go back to console, go back to PC, go back to where the things that we know. But I would assert, just by looking at these numbers, that we are potentially missing the biggest opportunity that's ever been given to us as game makers. People that aren't in the games industry companies are putting devices out there that are perfectly tuned to what we do. And people who aren't gamers love them, and they want more of that, and they want to download those games and play those games, and we're the guys that can do that. Already, there's murmurings of us giving up at the first hurdle. So what about that? We are the killer app on these devices. We are the leading driver of growth. According to App Annie, 75% of all iOS app revenue comes from games, 80% when you consider Google Play revenue. So all those big numbers that just sound like big numbers are actually driven by games. 50 billion downloads, they're driven by games. All the money that's being paid out by the Apple App Store, the Google App Store, is driven by games. They are effectively devices that we can co-opt into our world because they're made effectively by the consumer to be gaming devices. So what about the money? This seems to be the rub. This seems to be the thing that makes everyone want to give up. So everything I've said so far seems to be taken as read. Yeah, it's a big market. Yeah, there's loads of software. Yeah, but you can't make any money. So what's the point? $10 billion paid out already by Apple. There isn't any stats that I can find, at least anyway, that are accurate around what Google is saying. But according to App Annie, around 38% in terms of monetization on iOS revenues. So not massive numbers yet, but numbers that are growing. According to App Annie again, top 200 US on the App Store this year will gross around 1.85 billion. Google Play around 400 billion. There's probably people in this room who have closer knowledge of this than I do, who might be able to add some weight to those numbers, but that's certainly what App Annie is saying. So a $2 billion plus marketplace in the top 200 just in the US. To put that in context, Facebook market last year globally for social games was just under 3 billion. So already just the US piece of the app market in just the top 200 grossing apps is already 2/3 of the way there. So the prize in terms of at the company level, again, you know these stories. 763 million in the first half, they've announced this from Gung Ho on Puzzle & Dragons. 180 million again announced in Q1 of this year from Supercell. People posturing possibly 900 million in revenues from those guys this year on the back of 2 products just on iOS. $1 billion potentially from King this year, an IPO in the back of it, who knows? But the point is here, these are huge commercial successes in anyone's terms, regardless of the platform. The kind of cost associated with developing these products and bringing them to market compared to AAA, the margins here are huge, a massive opportunity. So what does it mean in terms of our global marketplace? What does it mean to us as a game industry? Going back again to Victor's announcements this morning, this slide is put together by Newzoo, not quite as ambitious as Victor was, but looking at the size of the marketplace and where it's likely to go. We're already at 17% this year of our marketplace, according to these guys, coming from these devices. 17%, potentially growing to over 28% by 2016. Over a quarter of our marketplace was being attributed to these devices that people are starting to talk about giving up on, starting to talk about moving away from because the business model doesn't work. So, 2 billion devices already, 45 million downloads thereabouts this year, driven by games, 70 to 80% of the revenue coming from games, a market size of around $10 to $11 billion. Significant opportunity. New opportunity, new gamers, new money, new opportunities to build businesses and get gamers into our marketplace to deliver on Victor's mission. So, where's the catch? Why are we all talking about this being a problem? Why are we talking about abandoning it? Why are we talking about going back to doing things that we know? Well, first of all, as Ian said at the beginning, you've got to make a great game. Clearly, that's a given. I'm not going to go into that. That's a much different speech and one that many people in this room are better qualified to give than I am. But let's take it as read that whoever's listening to this and wants to take this idea on board can make a great game. So what are the biggest challenges that we're facing in this marketplace? Well, I call them the 3 M's. So marketing, monetization, margin. So marketing meaning discovery, distribution, acquisition. Monetization clearly meaning the business model. And margin is, at the end of the day, making some money. So the biggest issue that comes up time and time again here is discovery. It's the one thing that gets cited more than anything else. Frankly, I'd never even heard the word used in this way until we started talking about it on the App Store. Discovery. I call this the Hourglass Problem. We've got 1.9 billion apps trying to get at 1.5 billion people through this tiny, tiny aperture. This tiny aperture of the App Store or the Google Play Store. And clearly, that doesn't work. The smallest shop window in the world. There's a lot of friction there. But what's at fault? Is it the handsets? Is it the iPads? Is it the tablets? Is it the apps? Is it the users? Or is it just a really shitty way of trying to get content to people? I would actually postulate absolutely it's the latter. That this doesn't make sense in anyone's book. This doesn't make common sense. It creates a focus on the top 10. We have the situation where we have a self-reinforcing chart. We have a chart that everyone's focused on the top grossing, everyone wants to be there, consumers want to download those games, and we create situations that whilst we have great games at the top of the charts, Puzzles and Dragons is a great example, is it really right for any market for a single game to be the top grossing game of all of 2013 so far on Google Play? Does that really make sense? Clash of Clans is a brilliant game, I adore it, but should it really stay at the top of the charts for as long as it has? Should Candy Crush stay there as long as it has? Or is something else going on here? Is there something else going on that really shows that this market is operating inefficiently? And I would argue that it is. And what it results in is this huge barrier to entry. A barrier to entry that seemingly the most effective way of knocking it down is spending huge amounts of money on marketing, huge amounts of money acquiring users. A friend of mine at Zynga the other day said if they spend enough money, they can market a potato to the top of the charts. Now, unfortunately, that's probably true. You probably can get something like that to the top of the charts if you spend tens of millions of dollars. It won't stay there, it'll fall out, but that's the methodology, that's the mindset that's out there in the marketplace today. So how can we change that? What can we do that's different? How can we change the way that problem that exists in the Hourglass model operates? How can we upend that and disrupt that? Well, for me, one of the most important things is social discovery. So, interesting stat, 23% of time spent on apps or smartphones is spent on Facebook. So almost a quarter of the time that people that we're trying to get at, gamers we're trying to reach, is actually spent on Facebook. So Facebook's a pretty good place to start thinking about how to get to those users as an alternate to the App Store. Twitter, WhatsApp Messenger, Line, Kakao, these things are already operating well in other territories. Line and Kakao is already driving significant installs in Asia, in Japan and Korea. Consider China. China doesn't have this same situation. They don't have App Store and Google Play dominance. You can't use Google Play in China. The App Store isn't dominant. We saw the huge acquisition of 91 Wireless, one of the biggest third-party app stores in China, by Baidu, $1.9 billion, indicative of the fact that the App Store doesn't have to always be king. The App Store doesn't have to always be the sole way of getting apps onto a device. That isn't happening in China. It is possible for it not to be the case. There's also the dedicated mobile game social networks, the D.I.C.E approach, the DNA approach. The Amazon, of course, have one. So there is already the start of this process being upended. Apple themselves are already talking as well about changing the way they do their algorithms. But clearly, there is an acknowledgement here that this is a problem that needs to be solved. There's an acknowledgement both in the minds of, I hope, game developers, but also in the minds of the providers. There is a way around this. There is a way to remove this obstacle because it's just this one problem that's causing this. It's just this one piece of friction. And we are more connected now than ever before. We're more socially connected than ever before. We have more people to tell us about what they play. I mean, God, I've made social games for 4 years. I know how to spam people on social networks. It's, there are ways to get out there and communicate. There are ways to tell people about the games you love and the games that you play. They're just not being used. Monetization, again, keeps coming up as the problem. We can't make money doing this. It doesn't make sense. Obviously, it's tied to distribution. If you are going to use customer acquisition as your strategy to get users, then unfortunately, the game's going to have to be free. We've created this situation, the situation has been created as a result of piracy and as a result of setting an expectation that apps should be free, that they now, surprise, surprise, are. And what we've also been very good at, and this has been, in my view, birthed in the Facebook world, has been very good at monetizing that, very good at taking that free-to-play model and turning it into a monetization model that genuinely works. Those stats, again, I think are worth pointing out. 96% of the top 100 apps on Google, top grossing apps on Google are free to play. 77% on iPhone and 60-odd% on iPad. The market is a free market. Let's not, right today, you can't fight that. There's no point putting out a product that isn't free unless it's a major franchise, unless it's a major sequel, unless you have something significant behind it that's going to augment that situation. You have to make a free product. So if you're going to make a free product, you better understand a few things. You better understand the freemium games business. The freemium games business is, in my view, completely different to anything I'd done before. So in my previous games companies, even though we were online and we were on mobile, our business model was as it always had been. It was pay at the point of play. And this business has operated, the Playdemic business for me on Facebook has operated completely differently to all of that. Everything has changed. To Rich's point, everything in our business has changed. The way we do things, the way we think about things, the way we organize teams, the way we put together our designs, the way we think about performance, the way that we look at a game's life cycle. Every single thing has changed. So if we're going to be free, we better understand that. We better understand it well. We better have a solid analytics platform underneath to deliver on that. And this is a ground-up thing. We better design, develop, and run our games with this in mind. They have to be run as a service. They have to be designed with this in mind. You can't crowbar this in. This is something that probably doesn't get talked about that much, but you can follow all these things, you can follow this methodology and still lose a shitload of money. And to avoid the fool's gold, you really have to understand that formula at the bottom in terms of freemium. You have to understand that your lifetime value minus your eCPI, your dev spend, and your overhead better be less rather than the money that's coming through the door. Because if it's not, you're dead. And this is the piece that takes detailed analytics understanding and detailed understanding of the gameplay, of the audience, of what people are doing in the game, what they're going to do in 6 months, 3 months, when your payback period is. Without that, you're going to make the fool's gold. I threw this slide in because I think it's something that's interesting around where we are in terms of premium games. I mentioned premium earlier about the opportunity for premium with major brands. I think there's something interesting here about what this could do to the wider games industry. I love freemium. I'm a great supporter of freemium. I think it's really important for the industry. I don't think it's the only solution. I think it's one of a number of solutions. But this week, for those of you who like FIFA as I do, something quite interesting has happened. We've had FIFA 14 come out on the iPad, come out on iOS, a few days before it comes out on console. It's come out as a freemium product on iOS, and it's going to come out, roughly speaking, normal price point around £40 on console. As a player of FIFA, it's absolutely my intention to do both, to download both, to buy one and download the other, which I've done. The iOS game is beautiful. It's stunning. It's potentially FIFA 12 style quality. It's a lovely, lovely game. And they've done loads of great work on the way the interface works, and you can play that game and really enjoy playing the game. And for $2.99, you can pretty much get a solid solution there and play that game for a long period of time. I was posed the question for the very first time as a consumer today around this point. Do I now go and buy the console version? Now, I'm going to, but I had to pose that question. I had to pose that question to myself because I really, really thoroughly enjoyed, more than I expected to enjoy, the game on the iPad. And to that point, this is where we have to be wary of this business model. Because for me, and I'm sure the guys at EA have thought this through, and this is just a postulation in the general, but there's a potential for price erosion here. As a consumer, there comes a point where I don't go and pay £40, that I just stay with my freemium solution. And this is something that, again, we need to be cognizant of as we grow this business. Whilst the opportunity is there, and whilst I'm arguing very strongly for the hardware, for the demand for games, for the software, we have to consider its role in the wider industry and equally the damage it can do if not handled properly. So what are we doing? How does this play into what I'm doing? As Ian said at the beginning, this is about how I sold this idea internally to my guys and to Ian and to my board. We're doing lots of the things that I said that we feel mitigate the risk. So we're taking one of our Facebook games, a game called Village Life. It's a proven, inverted commas, game on Facebook. It's got over 1 million DAU. It's made several tens of millions of dollars in its life to date, which is about 9 months. It has been iterated, so we've worked a lot with that economy. We've tweaked it. We've got it to a point where we're happy with its revenue generation, its monetization, its retention. And we're releasing it as a fully cross-platform integrated game. So it's a single game instance. It's playable on Facebook PC, on Canvas, and obviously also on iOS and on Android. That was a pretty tough technical challenge for us as a relatively small studio, but it's one that we felt was crucially important, largely because we feel that having a game that can be playable across both those platforms and utilizing Facebook as our way of going around, if you like, the App Store, that gives us that catalyst of users. We're hopeful that many of our DAU, and they tell us that they do, but we're hopeful that many of our DAU want to go and play that game on the iPad. We're hopeful that they'll play the game on Canvas during the day, maybe at the office, and they'll play an iPad at home, maybe iPhone on the way home. We've seen this from King's experience with Candy Crush. I know Ricardo's spoken about this a lot. The experience that they had doing something very similar with Candy Crush was that not only did they see an improvement in retention, but also monetization across both platforms. So as well as users being able to actually play the game cross-platform and actually have a better experience and retain better, they actually felt able to spend more money from doing so. We also know our audience, because clearly this is a game that we've been running for a period of time. We've had many installs through it. We know who those people are. We know who to target. We know what they want to spend money on, what they don't want to spend money on. And we know its metrics. So it's hooked into our analytics. We know how it works. However, all that said, we've still got a significant marketing budget behind us. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be interesting. If I can leave you with one thought, it would be this. Let's not turn our backs on the greatest opportunity that's being afforded to us as an industry. There's more hardware, more software, more gaming devices, potentially more gamers in the world through these mobile devices than ever before at any time in our history. Let's throw water on the naysayers, stick to our guns, and I think today, if you use some of the ideas that we're using, you can certainly assuage and mitigate some of those risks. And as we move forward, I think the opportunity is going to be much greater than we see here today. Thank you.